I think that we do have a bit of an idea in our schools that the most economical way to operate a school is the way that one can process the most bodies through in the most efficient amount of space in the least amount of time. And this is what I would call like the industrial model.
The efficiency.
And, yes, the efficiency or industrial model. And it is modeled after manufacturing, in which we try to do that. We try to get the most output in the least time with the least amount of personnel costs and so on. And I'm not certain that that is the best model for the field of education. Even if you apply that model as something as simple as taking a vacation, and then you can see. We don't necessarily want to do the least amount of activities with the least amount of money spent or compacted into a small amount of time. In other words, we want to have quality. And I think that we have so far looked upon the schools, especially larger school systems, by the industrial model. And I think that's a natural thing because our nation has been fueled by the industrial model.
Well, General Motors certainly is concerned with quality in each of its products, but it knows how, in fact, it ought to define each product and how it ought to look and what the finished product ought to be. But certainly it's difficult to look at education. It's difficult to say a student should learn this and should know that and should come out looking like this when he graduates with a diploma. Is that not a difficult concept?
I think what you're pointing out is the difficulty of applying totally the industrial model to the field of education.
Yes.
If we look at the industrial model, the labor unions and the educational labor system in the state, ISTA, Indiana State Teachers Association, they would not be under the industrial model. My question is, what is the impact of a transfer of schools or consolidation of schools, whatever you call it, upon labor, meaning the spirit of faculty? Certainly certain faculty will be released, some will be doing other kinds of jobs. Isn't this a real problem when you try to combine two schools?
Certainly it's one of many problems that schools are confronted with, say school boards or school administrators, whatever you would prefer, in any situation where your enrollments are shrinking. You have a reduction in force, and typically the master agreement or the collectively bargained agreement will have provisions for reduction in force, and it's usually a seniority and areas that you may teach. But part of the reason for consolidating, say, two high schools into one would be to better utilize that faculty, to enable them to specialize a little bit more in their field of preparation, and possibly instead of having 4 or 5 preparations or even 3 preparations, maybe just have 2 or 3 preparations in which they can do a better job. And that's theoretical. Hopefully they would be doing a better job.
So labor unions or labor in itself might not necessarily oppose this kind of change?
Not really. They would possibly have some input through their membership at the local level, and I would hope that administrators would be talking with the teachers, leaders, be they federation or association or independents, as they make the move to consolidate schools.
Has that complicated the process of closing a school? In Indiana, of course, we've just had a collective bargaining law for teachers in, what, 73 or 4? So it's 15 years or so. It certainly would seem that throws a complication into the process. not
really. It's just a fact of life. You have to deal with the exclusive representative of the teachers, and it's really an administrative decision to close schools, not the decision of teachers, but they're an important ingredient in the entire formula of closing. Certainly if you close one high school and bring teachers in and students in from another high school, you're going to have some transition years where you have some difficult times and problems to solve. And in this whole process, the administration must deal with preparing teachers for this change. Not just the teachers that are moving to a new building and the students, of course, too, but those teachers that are on site to the building that is growing, let us say. And they must be prepared for these changes, and I think sometimes that's overlooked.
Lane, Pat, what clients or what consumers are most upset by the change in school? Are the parents most upset? Are the students most upset? Are the alumni? Who really organizes in terms of trying to make sure a particular school stays open? Who is hurt the most, or who is upset the most by this kind of change?
Well, from what I've seen, students in the school are quite upset by the change because they're within transition. And also, I think I would say that probably the alumni of the school are, because it threatens to give them a sense of rootlessness and a place where they didn't come from anymore. It's fair to say, however, though, that that's happened to a great number of schools in Indiana over the past 7 or 8 decades here, as we've seen school consolidation. Many high schools and elementary schools have, as they say, disappeared.
How does this compare, the school closings with consolidation that we went through when in the 60s? Is this a different kind of thing where, in fact, it is a lot of times it is not a merger, which is what consolidation was, but it's out, close the school and bust the kid across town?
I would say they're similar in many respects. The politics of the situation, the tough decisions, the loyalties to the schools being closed, the emotions are there. I would disagree a little bit with Lane in the sense that the student body is probably more likely to accept their new school as time goes on. Now, I'm not talking about the alums and all of that, because there are difficulties. I'm not saying there aren't difficulties, but the students will change. The parents probably have a tougher time of it, really, in making that adjustment, and that's where you're going to hear people complaining most, probably from the parents. Students are pretty reasonable, I think, if they understand why the change is being made. And it goes back to quality educational programs for the youngsters, K through 12, not a particular family, not a particular student, but the total system has to be considered in moves of consolidation or closing of schools.
Parents talk about getting away from the neighborhood school concept, that in fact, if Johnny can't walk 2 blocks to school, if he has to get on a bus and spend a half hour going to school and a half hour coming back, then in fact, that damages his educational experience. But in fact, we've been getting away from the neighborhood school for quite some time, haven't we? Has that hurt education?
I don't think it necessarily has hurt education, no. And as you say, we have been getting away from it with our mobility and changing populations and population shifts within urban areas and so on. I'd like to get back to the question of size just for a moment, because it seems to me that this question is at the bottom of the decisions that's made when it's time to close the school. In other words, the size is judged to be not adequate anymore to maintain the number of schools that we have. And one of the arguments that's given in favor of school closings has to do with facilities. I know that's not the only one. I think that we could take a look at the way facilities are shared in some of the fields like vocational education and career centers and so on. There seems to be an assumption made that every school, to be efficient, has to furnish all the facilities. We don't do that in industry, and we don't even do it with our schools. We do have kids going to career centers for half days, and we do have centers like that. Communities might consider a pooling of facilities. Right now, what we're considering is a pooling of the student body.
Is that not a matter of economy? I mean, to duplicate a vocational program in every school wouldn't really be very economic.
You could argue it that way, and of course, then that would lead towards the argument that one could leave the existing schools open, and it would be more economical just to have a centralized facilities such in vocational and perhaps science and things like that, or advanced studies.
Lane, if I could, excuse me, Lane, if I could get back to the issue of size, if the school size, if you're going to close 1 or 2 schools and the school size and both schools are about the same, how do you make the decision?
With difficulty. With difficulty. I think that what I'm saying here is that there may be other alternatives than the one you've just presented me with, which is really an open and shut kind of case.
Yeah. Well, in that case, it seems like somebody's going to lose and somebody's going to win. In other words, one school will close, the other will stay open, and as you say, it'd be a very difficult kind of decision. So it'd come down to politics.
John, I don't think it's a win-lose situation necessarily. I think the students are going to win in the end. The whole issue presented earlier here just a moment ago on consolidating career centers and offering advanced courses. We have the technology today to do that if we so desire to do that. You know, an advanced course in a foreign language could be offered through the media, and it could be interactive media. It's here. We use it on our campus. It's been used throughout the state. The key in all of this process, you're talking quality education again, and you're talking about teachers. And the difference is going to be the teachers when we get right down to it. In any school consolidation, if the teachers are supportive of it, and ultimately they're the ones teaching the children at whatever level, and if they've accepted it, understand it, certainly there'll be difficulties to work through. But they're the key, and that's the difference in quality education. Size is an important issue as you look at what facilities you can have, whether you can have a swimming pool, whether you can have an industrial education area, whether you can have studios for drama, whether you can have athletic facilities. Size certainly comes into consideration. But on the other hand, you can have good quality education in smaller schools. In fact, there is some evidence that indicates that students that go through smaller schools, high schools now I'm speaking specifically, end up with a little better education generally, do a little better on some standardized testing, have a better feeling towards their school. And the faculty and the parents also share in this camaraderie, if you will, in smaller schools. But as you get down to the hard facts of life, it usually comes down to dollars and cents. And that's one of the keys in any school consolidation. It's a fiscal necessity to consolidate and bring together some of the secondary schools and elementary schools. If the building is not being utilized fully, if the faculty is not being utilized fully, if the building is in need of repair, for instance, that has to be considered. The utilities, your utility bills, I'm sure, have gone up enormously since in the past 10 years. We know everyone has. And that's one of the fixed costs that schools have to be concerned about, and that could be a consideration. The maintenance, the upkeep, all of the building site, the historical value of the building to the community, those are decisions that must be made as you look at consolidating schools.
Is the technology easing any of this? I mean, is the ability, as you say, to teach a course at several different schools from one location, the interactive, would seem to, in fact, negate the argument that you have only 3 students here and 2 students there who want this advanced math class or this advanced physics class, that you really need a larger school to be able to justify teaching that. It would seem the technology that you talk about would make it possible to teach that class to small groups in several schools rather than have to have one big school to do that.
I think that's true. I think that's something that we haven't considered. One of the arguments that's given in the case of school closings, high school closings, is that there aren't enough students willing to take the advanced classes to make a class. And of course, the technology could help us overcome that. But what we're overlooking there as well is a larger question, and that is, why aren't the students taking the advanced classes? We're making an easy assumption that since there are only a few students in school that wish to take advanced mathematics or calculus or science, we won't have a class for them, or we need to combine schools. On the larger scale, on the international scale, we need to ask, why aren't our students, and this is true through much of America, taking the advanced subjects in the secondary schools?
Do you have an answer to that, or a theory?
I don't have an answer to that. The theory might lie in a rising standard of living and ease of life. We're not as young a nation as we were once, and people talk about the need to recapture the spirit that brought us on the rise. It's always more dynamic and energizing to be climbing than to when you reach the top. And nations have had a problem with that before. I don't mean to make this an international political issue, but I really did want to raise the question that's behind the question, and that is, why aren't our students choosing to take more of the advanced classes instead of just saying, well, since they aren't, let's just consolidate the schools of the class?
You know, Lane, I think that's an interesting point, because perhaps we're really talking about the wrong things. We're talking about demographics, we're talking about economics, we're talking about politics in terms of which group has most influence, you know, which set of politicians went to what school and why does that school stay open. Let's say the athletic team, after all, we haven't won a state championship in about 10 years now. So maybe we're focusing on the wrong things. Maybe we should be talking about values and what kids should learn. But it seems like these issues are not front and center.
Yes, I agree with you. And that's why I said at the outset, when you talk about the efficient use of your resources, what do you really mean by efficiency? And efficiency seems to me to be a quality education and the most widespread education for the student body. And it would include students that want to take the advanced courses.
If I could quibble over words, maybe we have efficiency now, but we do not have effectiveness.
I would agree with that.
So it's easy to get efficiency, but determining what is effectiveness is a far more difficult issue.
Effectiveness is a little broader word that describes it perhaps better.
Certainly, we're being faced with additional requirements in our schools for graduation, for instance, with the A+ program in Indiana, the academic diploma. Most schools are moving from a 6-period day to a 7-period day in their high schools and middle schools. That pressure is there. We know we are in a global society. It really is a values issue, John. It's not a simply Muncie or Kokomo or Evansville issue.
Well, it certainly is, and it's been put in the international arena when we say, well, are our children in America getting a comparable education as the Japanese or the Germans? And the questions a lot of times seem to be, hey, no, we're not. Is that fair? Is that a fair yardstick?
I think it's fair to look at what the other nations of the world are doing in education because we're doing it in all the rest of the fields now.
I think it's realistic. Our society, our world is small. Well, you know, we can jump on a plane and be in Japan when a few hours from now, maybe 7, 8 hours.
Or this gets to the issue of curriculum. How should a curriculums also change when you combine schools, do they not? Or do they?
This is one of the arguments that's made. And
yes or no, we're down to that point.
Some of the arguments that's made.
It's certainly not a simple problem. It's very complex to close schools, to consolidate a high school with another high school, to close a school system and do the consolidation of the 60s kind of thing.
Difficult to close this program, but we are out of time. Thanks to our panelists, Pat Daunt, Lane Burkle, and John Rouse for their comments today. I'm Larry Law. Thank you for joining us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana, 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Mike Seaborg, Bill Mosher, Nancy Carlton, and Steve Johnson. This program is a production of University Media Services and the Department of Political Science. Facilities and funding are provided by University Media Services on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.